The role of Groom of the Stool outlasted the Tudors, evolving with the monarchy itself. Under the Stuarts, it became the Groom of the Stool, a purely ceremonial office of great prestige, but its grubby, intimate origins were never quite forgotten. It stands today as one of history's great paradoxes, a job that was, on its face, the most demeaning and disgusting position a nobleman could possibly hold. Yet it was this very intimacy, this shared humanity in the most private of moments, that made it the key to unlocking the inner sanctum of power. It reminds us that behind the grand theater of history, behind the crowns and the ceremonies, the levers of power are often found in the most unexpected and most unmentionable of places. The job description from hell. Narrator: to understand the role of the Groom of the Stool, we must first strip away our modern sensibilities about privacy and hygiene. In the Tudor world, the body was not a private matter, especially not the king's body. It was an instrument of state. Its health, its humors, its very output were indicators of the health of the kingdom itself. A healthy king meant a stable nation. An ailing king could spell chaos, and so the most private of acts became a matter of public concern, managed within the most exclusive of spaces, the king's Privy Chamber. Here we find the central instrument of the groom's duty, the closed stool. This was not some crude bucket in a corner. It was, in effect, a portable throne, a handsome wooden box, often padded and upholstered in velvet and silk, with a hinged lid. Beneath the lid was a pewter or ceramic bowl, ready to receive the royal deposit. The groom's primary duty was to manage this object and its use. When the king felt the call of nature, the groom would be summoned. He would bring forth the closed stool, position it for the king's comfort, and then he would wait. He stood by, a silent, attentive witness to the royal bowel movement, but his job did not end there. In fact, the most crucial part was yet to come. Once the king was finished, it was the groom's responsibility to perform the act of cleaning. He would have at his disposal bowls of water, soft linen cloths, and a collection of towels. He was the man who personally washed and dried the king's posterior. It was a task of supreme intimacy, one that no other courtier, no matter how high their rank, would ever be asked to perform, and even then, the duty was not complete. The groom was also the king's chief medical observer. He was required to inspect the royal leavings before they were disposed of. He would note the color, consistency, and smell. In an age dominated by the theory of the four humors, where health was a balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, the king's stool was a vital diagnostic tool. The groom would report his findings to the royal physicians, discussing the king's health in frank, unfiltered detail. A bout of constipation or diarrhea was not just a personal discomfort for the king, it was a piece of state intelligence. To mask the inevitable odors of his office, the groom was also in charge of the chamber's atmosphere. He would ensure sweet-smelling herbs were strewn amongst the rushes on the floor, and that the king had access to pomanders, oranges studded with cloves, or metal orbs filled with fragrant unguents to hold to his nose. Let us be clear, this was a job for a gentleman. The men appointed as Groom of the Stool were not lowly servants. They were knights, the sons of aristocrats, men of good standing and education. Sir William Compton, Henry VIII's first groom, was his childhood friend. Sir Henry Norris was a respected courtier and diplomat. These were men who could have aspired to any number of clean and prestigious roles, yet they chose this one. They chose to be the chief attendant of the royal toilet. The question that hangs in the air, thick and pungent as the chamber itself, is simply, why? The unbelievable perks of the Privy Chamber. The answer to why lies in one of the fundamental truths of any royal court. Proximity is power. Physical closeness to the monarch was the single most valuable currency a courtier could possess, and absolutely no one was closer to the king, more consistently and more intimately, than the Groom of the Stool. This proximity granted the groom three extraordinary, life-altering perks: unparalleled access, immense influence, and staggering financial power. First, access. The groom was the ultimate gatekeeper. He was with the king from the moment he woke up, assisting him with the lever, the formal morning dressing ceremony, to the moment he went to bed at the kosher. He saw the king in his nightshirt. He saw him unguarded, vulnerable, and without the intimidating public persona. While dukes and archbishops queued for a formal audience, the groom had the king's ear at any time of day. He controlled the flow of people and paper into the king's private world. If you wanted to pass a message to the king, petition for a favor, or simply get a moment of his time, the first and most important person to befriend was the Groom of the Stool. He could grant or deny access at his discretion, making him a pivotal figure in the court's social and political ecosystem. Second, this access bred influence. Imagine the conversations that took place in the quiet moments within the Privy Chamber. While attending the king, the groom could subtly champion a friend's cause, mention a rival's misstep, or offer his own opinion on a matter of state. Henry VIII was notoriously mercurial. His favor could be won or lost in an instant. The groom was in a unique position to shape the king's mood and opinions. He heard the king's private frustrations, his secret plans, his unvarnished thoughts on the great men of the realm. This inside knowledge made him an invaluable ally and a terrifying enemy. He was the king's confidante, a role that gave him more real-world sway than many of the official great offices of state. Finally, and perhaps most tangibly, the job came with immense financial power. The Groom of the Stool was also the de facto keeper of the privy purse. This was the king's personal, informal treasury, a fund separate from the official state exchequer. It was from the privy purse that Henry paid for his personal expenses, his lavish clothes, his gambling debts, his gifts to mistresses, and his secret political projects. The groom was in charge of managing this vast flow of cash. He kept the accounts, he paid the bills, and he was responsible for tens of thousands of pounds a year, a truly colossal sum at the time. This financial control opened up endless opportunities for personal enrichment. The groom received a handsome salary, but the real money came from gifts, grants, and the clever management of the king's funds. Sir William Compton became one of the wealthiest men in England, acquiring over 20 manors and vast estates, all while serving as groom. The position was a golden key, unlocking a treasure chest of royal patronage. The title itself evolved. What began as a purely functional, if disgusting role, became one of the most coveted appointments at court. The Groom of the Stool was the king's most trusted companion, his personal secretary, his private banker, and his ultimate confidante. The stench of the closed stool was a small price to pay for the sweet smell of success. A day in the life of Henry Norris. To truly understand how this blend of the menial and the mighty worked in practice, let us follow a day in the life of one of the most famous grooms, Sir Henry Norris. It is 1535. Henry VIII is in his mid-40s, embroiled in his great struggle with Rome and his passionate, turbulent relationship with Queen Anne Boleyn. Norris is at the very peak of his power. His day begins before dawn, in the quiet, fire-lit chambers adjoining the king's own. He is already dressed immaculately, a model of courtly elegance. His first duty is the lever. He enters the royal bedchamber where the king is stirring. Along with a few other high-ranking gentlemen of the Privy Chamber, Norris assists Henry in dressing. He hands the king his shirt, helps him with his doublet and hose. It is an act of ritualized intimacy, reinforcing his privileged status. During these moments, he can brief the king on the day's schedule, mention an urgent letter that has arrived, or share a choice piece of court gossip. As the day progresses, Norris is a constant, quiet presence at the king's side. When Henry dines in private, Norris is there, overseeing the service. When a foreign ambassador seeks a private word, it is Norris who ushers him in and out. When a nervous courtier wishes to present a petition, he must first get past the watchful eyes of the groom. Norris is the human firewall around the king. At some point, the call comes. The king requires the close stool. Norris signals to a page, and the velvet-clad throne is brought forth and placed in a private alcove. The other gentlemen discreetly withdraw, leaving the king alone with his most trusted servant. It is in this moment, a moment of profound human ordinariness, that Norris's power is at its most potent. The king, relaxed and unguarded, might complain about the obstinacy of his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, or express a frustration with the queen. Norris listens, murmurs sympathetic replies, and files the information away. Perhaps he uses the opportunity to praise a friend at court, suggesting him for a vacant office. Or perhaps he subtly casts doubt on an enemy, mentioning a rumor he has heard. The king's private thoughts, vented in a moment of physical relief, become Norris's political capital. After the duty is complete and the medical inspection discreetly handled, the day moves on. In the afternoon, Norris might be found in his own office, a ledger open before him. This is the privy purse. He tallies up the king's gambling losses from the previous night's card games. He disperses cash to a royal messenger being sent on a secret errand to France. He approves a payment to the king's tailor for a new suit of cloth of gold. He is in essence the CEO of the king's personal life. His evening is a mirror of the morning. He attends the king at the caucha, the formal undressing ceremony. He is the last person to see the king before he retires behind his bed curtains. As he leaves the royal bedchamber, Sir Henry Norris is not just a servant who has spent his day attending a toilet. He is one of the most informed, most influential, and most powerful men in the Kingdom of England. He is at the absolute center of the web, but in the Tudor court, the center of the web is a dangerous place to be. When the job goes wrong, the same intimacy that granted the Groom of the Stool his power also made him uniquely vulnerable. To be close to Henry VIII was to be close to a capricious, paranoid, and often cruel son. One wrong move, one perceived betrayal, and a man could be burned to ashes. The fall from grace could be as swift and brutal as the rise had been spectacular. The story of Henry Norris is the ultimate cautionary tale. For years, Norris navigated the treacherous currents of the court with masterful skill. He was a friend to the king, and crucially, a friend and staunch ally of Queen Anne Boleyn. His position seemed unassailable, but in the spring of 1536, the political winds shifted with terrifying speed. The king, desperate for a male heir and already infatuated with Jane Seymour, had tired of Anne. He needed her gone. But divorcing a second queen was a messy business. A more permanent solution was required. Thomas Cromwell, the king's ruthless chief minister, was tasked with orchestrating Anne's downfall. He needed to prove not just that she had failed to produce an heir, but that she was a traitor. The charge was adultery, and to make the charge stick, he needed to name her lovers, who were the men closest to the queen, who spent hours in her company, sharing jokes and conversation, the tight-knit circle of the Privy Chamber. And at its heart was Henry Norris. His close friendly relationship with Anne, once a sign of his influence, now became a weapon to be used against him. On May Day 1536, Norris was riding with the king at a tournament in Greenwich. A message was handed to Henry. His face darkened. He abruptly left the tournament, taking Norris with him. During the ride back to Westminster, the king interrogated his groom. He promised a full pardon if Norris would only confess to adultery with the queen. Here was the terrible dilemma: admit to a crime he almost certainly did not commit and live with the shame, or maintain his innocence and face the king's wrath. Henry Norris chose to maintain his innocence. He swore on his soul that the queen was blameless. It sealed his fate. He was arrested and taken to the Tower of London, along with 4 other men, including Anne's own brother. He was charged with high treason. The evidence was flimsy, based on coerced confessions and misinterpreted courtly flirtations. But it was enough. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. On the 17th of May, 1536, Sir Henry Norris was led to a scaffold on Tower Hill. Unlike some of the other condemned men who gave vague confessions to appease the king, Norris stood firm. He admitted to being a sinner in general terms, as was customary, but he refused to confess to the specific crime of adultery. He maintained the queen's innocence to the last. Then the axe fell. The man who had woken the king, who had dressed him, who had shared his secrets and managed his money, was executed as a traitor on the flimsiest of pretexts. His vast estates were forfeited to the crown. His name was disgraced. His proximity to power had led him not to a dukedom, but to the executioner's block. The fate of Henry Norris sent a chilling message through the court. The Groom of the Stool was the king's creature. He could be raised up, but he could also be struck down in an instant. The job was a devil's bargain. It offered the pinnacle of worldly success, but it demanded absolute loyalty and a healthy dose of luck. To survive was to walk a tightrope over a pit of fire every single day.